When I head outside in the morning for work, the first thing I notice is just how bright it is outside. It's usually so bright that I have to let my eyes adjust to the light before I can stop blinking. Then I notice the weather. I ask myself, is it too hot for a jacket, too cold for shorts? Is the wind blowing? Does it look like rain? Is that smoke I smell? What's that rumbling sound? Is that an eagle or a falcon sitting on that lamppost? What was that noise? Do I have my wallet? How about my keys? Are my tires inflated? As you can probably see, there are a ton of concerns for me before even leaving the house. This is life. Typically, I carry my bike down the steps and prepare my sensitive butt cheeks for the long and bumpy ride to work. There's something I noticed though, and maybe you do this too, but whenever I pass someone on the road or on the sidewalk, I'm all too aware that several choices for interactions with this stranger are possible, and at least one will occur. Maybe we pass, and as we do, we make eye contact, and that eye contact forces us to say something to break the tension. One of us will say, "Hey, hi, how you doing?" And then we'll go on about our day like nothing happened. Maybe we'll pass each other with our heads down, avoiding eye contact, and neither of us will have to say anything. There's always a chance, however, that a seemingly normal encounter can turn abnormal. The way we react to visual and auditory stimuli in our environment, it's colored by our experiences. Now, I remember when I lived in Los Angeles, I was heading up to Santa Monica Boulevard, the Circus Disco, for a night of dancing with my then totally normal and not at all crazy girlfriend, and me, being the cheap and frugal bastard that I've always been, decided to find parking down the various side streets. I was good at this, and normally I could find a spot mere yards from whatever place we were going to. This night was no exception. We were walking up, and a suspicious man, ragged, hair uncombed, hands in his pockets, head up, nodding to us in a motion that he intended to talk to us, and naturally, hell, I wanted nothing to do with this guy. But my eyes became focused on his hands. They were obscured in his pockets as he called out to me loudly, "Hey, mijo!" He walked up to me, just inches away with his hands in his pockets, jamming something into my side. My adrenaline kicked in, and before I could even make a rational decision, I was pushing him away from me, putting my hands up, yelling at my girlfriend to get her to run away. But of course, the dumbass stayed, yelling at me to just let it go, like I had a choice in the matter. This is life. The randomness of this encounter is not lost on me, and it's colored my experiences through life. In the 2 months that I've spent biking 12 miles to work every day, and sometimes walking as well, I've come to a realization. Nothing is easy without a car. Which brings me to my subject, open worlds. I have seen a lot of this type of game recently, and sometimes, like in the Witcher's case, it's pretty good, and in other cases like Mafia 3 and Final Fantasy 15, it's bad. Why do some open worlds work, and why do others not work? And the biggest question of all, why do we need them at all? Knowing the answer to this is the key to knowing how to evolve the genre. So let's dig in, shall we? I have a confession to make. I've been playing a lot of Oblivion lately. So much, in fact, that it got me thinking about open worlds. I made the mistake recently of purchasing Mafia 3 after having seen a particularly well-done cutscene that was drenched with emotion, and I thought that surely a game with this sort of emotional magnitude in its cutscenes, it must have a really interesting world and gameplay to tie it all together, but in a rare case of most reviewers being right about a game, I feel like I got burnt. This got me thinking. Why are so many worlds so samey? I take Assassin's Creed, Far Cry 3, and Mafia 3 for example. Are either of these games doing anything radically different from each other? Not really. And if you take a deep look at the systems, they're basically the same game set in different locations with slightly different mechanics, but the same goal is in mind. Like RPGs, open world games are not evolving. What is the point of having an open world in your video game? Well, the tagline for so many open world games seems to follow a theme. Go anywhere, do anything. And upon taking a closer look at these games, we find that going anywhere is generally true, but doing anything? That's not even close to true. And as with many games coming out in the genre, and the amount of years the technique has been employed in games, the genre of open world games has been stale. You would think in all these years we've been using them that they would evolve and change and drastically, but they haven't. Why is that? I mean, why are most open world games so boring and sterile? Why do we find ourselves going here, delivering this, or going there and killing that, or running around rooftops looking for feathers and Coke packets? Alright, let's look at the scourge of open world games. Let's look at scale. Open worlds are touted widely for their size. In promotional material, we see a lot of talk about game world size. Players seem to only talk about how long it takes them to walk from one end of the map to the other, as if this were some measure of quality. What is the use of having a huge open world if the things that you want to do are separated by artificial game lengtheners like huge gaps of empty space with nothing to do? Let's look at 3 games, okay? Let's look at Oblivion and Final Fantasy 15, and then as a synthesis argument to this thesis, let's add in a game you may not have heard of, Gothic 2. Let's look at how each game handles the distribution of content, since that seems to be a common theme in all these open world games, to deliver as much content as they can to you in a big open world. Now, the way I'll do this is by measuring the content based off of a 5-minute journey in a single direction. I will make an effort to examine each thing I come across, but in the case of something like Oblivion, it's really hard to manage the content of the overworld if you constantly do every dungeon you come across. So 5 minutes in one direction, what kind of content do we get? Let's look at Oblivion first. Now that I'm away from the farm outside of town, I see some valuable recipe ingredients, and soon after that, a bandit guarding a mine. Killing this guy isn't exactly hard, so I'm soon on my way towards a statue icon. And after a minute or so of walking, I reached a Meridia shrine, where I find out that I am not yet strong enough to partake in this quest. But it is interesting enough that I know I'll probably be coming back here to do this later. I walk on and I see a gazebo, like a fountain in the distance, which ends up being an altar where I receive a blessing. Cool. Alright, I go a little further and I see some ruins, with a goblin guarding some fish and a campfire. The fight lasts a couple seconds and I wander around until I find a door to yet another dungeon. And in 5 minutes I've found quite a bit of content. But it's not exactly riveting content, is it? I mean, when you really look at it, the reason I say this, it's a bit random, isn't it? I mean, we don't know what's inside and we don't know what our motivations are for exploring it, other than to just kill stuff, gain some new loot, level up, and stave off boredom for a little while. But beyond that, what is our motivation to explore these places? We could feasibly beat the game at low levels since enemies scale to your level, so why even explore? I mean, why do anything? It's just random content spread out a decent distance from one another, but it is decent amount, and in the case of Oblivion, quantity over quality at least works in this regard, but one can't help but feel the experience would have been stronger with a smaller world with half the content in a designed and less randomly generated terrain map. Alright, so now let's take a look at Final Fantasy 15. Now I want to start by saying this because I think it's important. It took me about 5 minutes to finish loading the game. Then I had to teleport to town, which was another loading screen. And then rest, because it was night, which is basically another loading screen, just so I could begin this test. Once I did, the results were pretty predictable. This game loves to waste your time. And you can say whatever you want about Square Enix. Their character designs are stupid, game designs are outdated, they're greedy, they ruined Eidos, whatever, dude. You can say what you will, but these people know how to make some interesting looking worlds. Interesting looking worlds. Now I say that with emphasis here because once you actually get up close and start looking for stuff to do here, you come up completely empty. I mean, look at that art style. You cannot say that everything looks flat. Not like Oblivion. I mean, in some places in Oblivion, you gotta admit, there's some flat-looking places that don't really have a whole lot going on in them. I mean, for example, look at this. You can see why it took them 10 friggin' years because every inch of this game looks stylish. Each area is carved into stunning details that really make you feel like you're in a world that could possibly exist. problem is, if you travel randomly in any direction without following a quest marker, you'll find that the only thing to do in this game is to walk and kill things. There's also a few mechanics at work here that discourage you from wandering around. First, when I went to this down drop ship thinking I could jump inside the open mouth of this thing, I found out that it was just for show. My brain started programming assumptions, made me believe that everything I saw in this game from this point on was an illusion, a mirage, if you will, there just to give the world artificial depth and padding to make you think that there was stuff to go out there and find and do. The other mechanic in this was that the fact that in a place where I found and fought a mob of just level 12 creatures, I had a mob of level 47 Magitech assassins dropped right on my head. They killed me in 2 hits. Now I got 3 reasons to never explore. 1, there's nothing out there for me to explore and find that's even interesting. 2, the placement of mobs and random generation of monsters is totally random. And 3, I'm better off just getting a mission and getting into my car and explore. At least the car takes me directly to something interesting, or at least in the vicinity of something interesting. Now let's take a look at Gothic 2. In 5 minutes of walking around, we see the following. We meet a pirate that is trying to sneak his way into the city, but he can't get in looking like he does. He asks us for help with that. He needs clothes. Then we meet a farmer that says he'll give you some clothes if we do some work on the farm for him. Then we go behind the farm and we find a windmill, and further back we see some stone structures with switches embedded into the rock. If we follow that path around, we find a tablet that we can't read yet, but it's valuable. Further north, we find a bandit who tries to lure us into a cave and kill us. And we still have time to spare to go down and find an orc guarding a cave, and to see a path that leads around to the town to even more mobs in a cave or 2. The level design here is deliberate. Each nook and cranny of this game is designed with a purpose, and multiple paths are given that can take you to secret areas full of loot, or strong monsters, or special areas with NPCs. Sometimes special merchants that sell special items, and this is why the level design is so good. Special areas containing amazing items like named weapons and stuff like that. Now, Gothic is a small open world, but it is truly open. At least the first part is. And you are free to look around as much as you want, but it's also a dangerous world, and the incentive to explore is there because on your first, second, and even third playthrough, you may find something you never knew existed, and it could be a truly amazing find. The deliberateness of design ensures that the player is never stuck, wandering around aimlessly looking for something to do on their way to find something, because while it is an open world with multiple paths through it, it's small enough that the navigating of the world isn't a chore like it can be in other, larger, more spread out open world games. The other thing about this game is that I could probably draw you a map of the entire world from memory, because it was that well designed that I literally remember every single landmark in this game. It's indelibly etched upon my mind. It's a memory just deep inside that I remember everything. I mean, that's a hell of a feat. I can't tell you where anything is in Oblivion or Morrowind or Skyrim or any of these huge open world games. I can't draw you a map of those from memory, but I can of this game. I can even tell you where mobs are placed. I mean, that's just how memorable the world is. Also, nothing in this game is there just for the sake of staving off boredom. It all has something to do with the story, even if it isn't directly related to what you're doing in the moment. It all exists to progress your character in meaningful ways. Now, too bad the combat is like mushy dog crap ground into a carpet. It's inept, the game balance is all over the place, and the game is hard for all the wrong reasons. But once you get over the initial power hump, it all seems to fall into place, and character progression is revealed to be the backbone of the game. The open world services the progression of your character by providing ways to progress meaningfully. See, in Oblivion, character progression is slow at times, and it's hard to notice any significant change in your character since everything scales with you. You can't really see how far you've come as a character. In Final Fantasy, leveling up is only there to give you the illusion of progression through putting up artificial barriers to moving the plot forward. In this way, the game can hardly be called an open world and only comes by that moniker in the strictest sense, in that it's a huge world that is sort of open, though there only seems to be 1 or 2, maybe even 3 ways out of a particular area, since most parts of an area are cordoned off by walls, both invisible and obnoxiously visible. In Final Fantasy XV, the map is sectioned off into smaller arenas that are surrounded by walls, very similar to the way areas were designed in World of Warcraft. You can technically go anywhere you want on the continent, but does that freedom really matter when the world is as barren as this one? I mean, it looks pretty, but there's nothing to do! With Gothic, character progression is obvious. You become obviously stronger when you gain enough strength to wield a longer, more dangerous weapon, for example, or when you are smart enough to wield a new powerful spell. The fact that there are so few weapons, so few spells, and so few sets of armor, these items are also incredibly difficult to gain access to. It makes getting and using these items that much sweeter, because the work that went into getting them was difficult. This also makes any encounter with NPCs that net you money, or the ever so valuable resource EXP, that much more important and satisfying, because you need EXP badly to progress your skills, stats, and so on to equip those items and to use them effectively. It's not just something the game hands out willy-nilly. EXP is actually a finite resource. The fact that EXP is finite also means that the player is encouraged to explore the world more thoroughly to progress, because without exploration, they are quite literally stuck. So if Oblivion is the thesis of open worlds, and Final Fantasy XV is the antithesis of open worlds, then Gothic is a sort of synthesis. But what does this all mean? Well, we have to go back to our question. What is the point of an open world? Is it to facilitate the story? Is it rendering the world in great detail? Or is it a content delivery platform for staving off boredom? What if the answer were all three? And I keep finding myself with questions. I ask myself, would Oblivion have been a better game if the game world was smaller, the content closer together, with half the quests and dungeons, but better designed with layered quests, sprawling dungeons full of real challenges, and worthwhile rewards? What if some of the world design philosophies of handcrafted worlds that made Gothic 2 so great were carried over to Oblivion? What if Final Fantasy XV took the philosophy of always having something to do in the world from Oblivion, and had quests that actually mattered to your progression like Gothic 2 did? Would these games have been better for it? Scale of Worlds seems to water down design. For instance, let's look at this altar to the god in Oblivion, right? Meridia. What about this place looks like an altar? I mean, aside from the statue. To me, when I look at this, I just see a statue placed in the middle of the woods. I start asking myself questions like, why isn't this statue laying on its side right now? I mean, every time it rains, water would wash away soil, and before you know it, unless this thing was built on top of solid concrete foundation, which I highly doubt these people had access to, how is this thing still standing? Not to mention, it just looks totally uninspired. I mean, these rocks surrounding it, a couple of trees, there's a candelabra for some reason, a little clearing with some flowers, but still, this doesn't look like a place of worship, especially to a Daedra that represents life and who strongly hates the undead. The design of this area does not tell that story. It tells me nothing of the deity. The design of this area is lazy. If you're being honest with yourself, you can at least look at this with an open eye and admit that. This is because when you have miles upon miles of space to cover and design, you do not have the proper amount of time to dedicate to any one area. With smaller worlds, you're able to dedicate a greater amount of time and resources to design, but when you emphasize quantity over quality, you have to cut corners. Unfortunately, design suffers. If we look at the good, fast, and cheap wheel, which is an artist's go-to when a client is asking for far too much from them, we see that in order to do something fast and cheap, our quality of our product suffers. If we want it fast and good, it isn't going to be cheap because we have to throw a lot of resources at it. If we want it good and cheap, it's going to take a lot of time because in order to be cheap, it has to be done with less resources, and in order for it to be good, It takes a long time to iron out systems and design it until it's perfect. So no matter what, something has to be sacrificed to make a game good, and to me, I would rather have a smaller world with more engaging content than a beautiful, big, empty world. I would also like to have a smaller world with less to do than a huge world with a lot of meaningless content that's just there to keep me from getting bored. Now, I personally would like to see open worlds evolve. The perfect world for me would be a small slice of a world, explorable from the start, but jam-packed with stuff to do without a whole lot of mindless walking. Gothic 2 came so close to doing exactly what I wanted, exactly what I had always dreamed of playing, but man, some of the gameplay elements are absolute dog crap. It attempted a fantasy open world simulation. You start the game with a mission to find the Eye of Innos, but in order to do this, you gotta talk to the paladins and convince them that you are worthy to have the Eye of Innos, but how you do this is totally up to you. And there are so many ways to accomplish this one goal that the sheer amount of options are staggering. That's openness. But no other game since, as far as I know, has really attempted to do what Gothic 2 did, or even try to evolve this formula. So how do you evolve the open world? Hey, I'm glad you asked. Now that we know what makes a decent open world, density, scale, and variety of encounters, how do we improve the formula? I got an idea. The Open World Life Simulator. To illustrate my idea, I want to tell you a story. Back when I was living in California and it was the height of the recession, I was unemployed. The upside was I had a lot of free time, the downside was I didn't have a whole lot of money to do stuff. So I used to hike and climb a lot because nature is, for the most part, free. A friend of mine had a great idea. He wanted to climb Santa Monica Mountain at night, camp out and see the sunrise. Yeah, I was game. I didn't quite know what I was getting into, though. I mean, in fact, I didn't even know how long it was going to take. I mean, all I knew is that we started in the daytime, and before we started climbing, I was strapping a light to my head. That was a bad sign. We hiked up the mountain for so long that by the time we were halfway up, it was nighttime. We reached the summit at midnight and decided to camp. By then, I was exhausted. I mean, getting up the mountain was an adventure in and of itself. I mean, with low visibility at any moment, I could have fallen into a hole, bitten by a snake, or attacked by a mountain lion. In the wilderness, anything goes. It got me thinking about all those open world games I play. You know, traveling takes little effort on the part of your character, and you don't really have to prepare for a trip. You just go out, walk up a mountain. But should it really be that easy? I mean, going up a mountain is an arduous task. By the time the climb is over, you're exhausted. And all you can really do is stop and catch your breath. I mean, would something like that be fun in a video game? I mean, it might be, but it depends on how you do it. I mean, the easiest way to do a mountain climbing is just to allow the player to walk up it. But does that feel like an accomplishment? I mean, if you feel a sense of accomplishment walking, then you're pretty easy to please, and this video is not for you. I mean, we here at Strat-Edgy, we like to nitpick everything and make life harder for gamers. What if you actually had the climb? And take a look at Far Cry 4 and the way it handled climbing. And it was simple and it wasn't perfect, but it was sort of fun. I mean, imagine that, and turning that into a fully fleshed out climbing simulator. Not some simple button presses with highlighted cliffs, but actual climbing and hiking. Then imagine the act of walking down a street being just like the stories I told you above, casually saying hello to people as you go by, being accosted by homeless people, having to make small talk with a possibly unstable man at a bus stop. These kinds of things can be done, but the scale of the world would need to be condensed. I mean, we're talking Warren Spector single block simulation scale here. I mean, isn't that what an open world is supposed to be? Go anywhere and do anything? I mean, going anywhere and doing anything isn't just stealing a car and running over a bunch of people or jumping ramps in slow motion. It's about options. It's emergent gameplay. It's the player finding things in the game to do that weren't necessarily designed that way. I mean, shouldn't the systems of our lives be gamified? I mean, sure, cut out the boring bits, but what if you wanted to learn how to cook and instead of walking up to a grill and pushing a button, then watching the player cook? What if you actually had to get ingredients, baste the meat, flip it so it doesn't burn? What if you were actually cooking? San Andreas is a lot of people's favorite open world GTA game, and I think there's a good reason for it. It was the nature of the evolution of that title. It was where we all believed at the time the genre would go. I mean, we expected GTA 4 to take all the things we loved, like eating and gaining weight, working out and getting buff, increasing our skills with driving and shooting, learning wicked tricks on a BMX. I mean, you don't actually learn tricks, but wouldn't that have been cool? What we got in GTA 4 instead was a step backwards in terms of simulation. San Andreas was an OG simulator. GTA 4 was just another GTA game. It was a missed opportunity. It seems to me that the obvious direction that open world games should be attempting to go in is the life simulator. Go out, find a job, or rob a bank, get killed by cops. Start over again, you died, game over. Climb a mountain, break your legs, get eaten by vultures. Game over, try again. Meet a girl, have sex, get her pregnant, hang yourself in a garage, game over. The point is, open worlds right now give us the illusion of freedom. A true open world would work towards pulling back on the illusions and give us more options. We saw this in GTA 5 with all the side content that you could do. For the motivated player, the game was quite literally a playground for your imagination, but it can be better. We should all want it to be better, right? This has been a rant from Strat-Edgy, and now that you heard it, go play some video games.